All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Irrational Confidence Podcast. We're talking college football, and it's week number 10. The college football playoff rankings are out. We have marquee matchups against the top teams, but the man who was just recently voted as the most eligible bachelor on Match.com in the greater northeastern Florida area at 9:02 p.m. when it is half moon and a little bit rainy outside. My co-host, Fresh, how you doing, buddy?
Perhaps those are pretty lofty accolades. I don't know if they'll pay off in the end, but we'll see. But it's just about that ranking is about as accurate as some of the top 10 rankings from the college football playoff poll.
All right, Fresh, let's start. We have some interesting games out there. We have the second leg of the Commander-in-Chief Trophy. This is a fun one for me because I'm really excited to talk about this game. It won our fan vote this week. Make sure you guys are following us on Twitter. Make sure you're interacting with us on those fan votes. So, Air Force traveling to Army this weekend. Air Force is a 7-point favorite. Over under is set at 40 points. And I wish they would set an over under for the time of the game for this one because I think this game is going to be quick, fast, and in a hurry because both these teams run the triple option. So, Fresh, let's talk Army, Air Force here. What are you thinking?
I mean, first of all, I love this kind of matchup. You get, it's real old school football. It's not flashy, passing around. It's not going to take 4.5 hours. Like, definitely take the under on the time. It's two teams who lock in, triple option. You get quarterback, on the edge, the fullback, making the dive play. Uh, each team knows exactly what they're doing. Um, Back and forth, they've been practiced against it, but it's just the execution style, and it's typical, military academy style where you are executing on the game plan, executing the play, very disciplined. You see these teams; both teams are very traditionally low penalties, high time possession, but they maximize their yards per play. It's a it's just a really cool setting. This game is being played in Arlington. They call it Choctaw Stadium. It's being played at Globe Life. Kind of they take this neutral. They take the neutral sites. They sort of bring the teams there instead of on campus. I wish they actually did the Army Navy and game on campus every once in a while like they did during 2020. They do Air Force Navy on campus, but this one they kind of put down in Texas, very close to multiple bases down there, and give all the soldiers a chance to come out and watch it. Um, Really, when you look at this football game, to start off with, first person I'd look at is fullback Brad Roberts. He was one of the top 5 leading rushers in the country last year. He's right up there again this year, over 900 yards and 13 touchdowns already through on the season for Air Force. He is a Colorado guy, so he definitely wanted to stay home, and he's made his 4 years there worth it. But he hits the hole with a power and a passion. It's something typically you think about fullbacks; they've long gone. They don't really exist anymore. But in the triple option, you are basically the ball carrier. You are the focused running back in the scheme, and he takes it. He runs with power. He is definitely the one who the offense is built around for Troy Calhoun and the Falcons there. On the other side, when you look at Army, we came into the season, we thought more of a defensive effort. We're looking at Andre Carter the second. Had a lot of, he's in our preseason all rational conference team. Had a bunch of sacks last year, only 2 so far this year, and really not getting the opportunity to get after the quarterback. But the defense as a whole is probably not performing what they're performing in 2021. They're giving up only 29 points a game, much different than what they were doing last year. Definitely trying to rebuild that defensive side of the football under Coach Monken. Both teams are scoring over 30 points a game, but the defense for the Falcons and only giving up like 13 or 14 points a game is definitely the major difference when it comes to this. Both teams are running for well over 300 yards. Very focused. Air Force, they try to sprinkle in the passing game every once in a while, but you might see 3 or 4 passes from them here and there. Coach Monken on the other side for Army, they've definitely tried to evolve their offense and try to find ways to keep up. Um, and they employ more of a multiple quarterback system. You have Chris Ballard, who's more of the passing quarterback, has a couple touchdown passes, throwing for about 500 something yards on the season. And you have Tyree Tyler, the running quarterback, who's run for 316 yards and 6 touchdowns. And at the point, he is definitely the leading rusher because their number one running back on the season is out, will not play in this football game. So Tyler is that leading rusher. He's going to have to be the focal point and then disperse it to his other, backfield mates there. as they move. Army's been an up and down year. Um, it kind of feels like they haven't recovered from being the favorites versus Navy in the Army Navy game last year, having a chance to win the Commander in Chief trophy, and then just losing there late in that football game, an ugly, sloppy Navy slowed it down kind of type of football game. You, you've seen the team win 2 games in a row. They have to win out to be bowl eligible because they have 2 FCS teams on their schedule. So hopefully this team can get focused and find a way to overcome and get a big upset over Air Force. Air Force has played well. They've beaten some quality teams. They played up with some solid teams out there in the Mountain West, and definitely in the running for potentially even playing for a Mountain West title. Still, they have some games available and still some tiebreakers at play. But this game just sort of trumps it all, where you start playing your peers. Um, Air Force won this game last year, but I have a gut feeling. I just think Coach Monk and Army, they've got the guys refocused. They want that Army Navy game to mean more than just beating Navy. They want it to be for the Commander in Chief trophy as well. If Air Force wins on Saturday, they claim the trophy by beating both the other schools. So I'm going to say Army gets it done in a 17-13, 2.5 hour football game at top.
It's interesting, man. Army's got 4 losses coming in on the season. Those 4 losses are Coastal Carolina, UTSA, Wake Forest, and Georgia State. Only the loss versus Georgia State is egregious. All 3 of those are respectable teams to lose to. I look at this. Army's played 3 different guys at quarterback this season, and you take a look at Cade Ballard and Kyer Thomas. Both of them very great running threats from that position. I know you were talking about the triple option here and what that's able to do on the offensive end of it. I can't get past the fact that where we've seen a change in the Army defense. Like the Army defense last year was just an unstoppable force, something that you expected out of the Army Academy over there in West Point. It was just so great there. And it's kind of become a little bit of a liability this season. We talked about Andre Carter II. We were both huge fans of his last year. We thought really high of him coming into the season. We could give a lot of respect to him. He's 6'7". He's a phenomenal football player. And then on top of that, they plays for one of the service academies. It's kind of sad to see that he only has 2 sacks this year. Is this because he had such a great year last year that teams are now scheming for him? They're game playing him. They're sending an extra blocker this way. Is it that check at the line that the quarterback comes up? And who are you finding? You're finding him at the line and making sure you roll your coverage within that police. Air Force 5-3 on the season. All 3 of their losses have been 1-score losses here. I was just kind of shocked by this. Air Force has 4 times the amount of rushing yards to passing yards this year. So you think about this is the Air Force Academy, their motto is aim high, fly, fight, win. I think that they're aiming really high to the point that they're going to capture the Commander-in-Chief trophy. I think they see that that's a big deal for them. They also become bowl eligible with this win. That would be a huge step for the Air Force Academy this early on in the season. I don't know. I think Air Force was bowl eligible last year. And Fresh, you can correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But I don't know when the last time that they were bowl eligible in the first weekend of November. That would be a huge step for them.
Yeah, I mean, anybody getting bowl eligible at this point of the year is always an accomplishment. I don't care what program you are, because there's still 4 games to go, 3 games to go in the season. Um, it shows that you're an elite program and you're playing at a high level. And considering they play in the Mountain West, it's not like they're not an independent like Army is. They have to play that conference schedule, like the Boise States, the Colorado States, etc. of the world. So you have to be focused, and they have been able to get it done and play very solid football across the board. It's been going on for years there. Coach Calhoun's been there for 20 plus years out there in Colorado Springs and built a solid program that is competing with anybody in the country. Game in and game out, and they're going to hustle.
Yeah, and the only thing that I had a little concern with the Air Force Academy was the fact that they're 1-2 on the road. This is only their 4th road game of the season, but they're 4-1 at home. So I kind of a little hesitant that they have to travel from Colorado all the way over to the East Coast here. Gave me a little bit of hesitation, but at the end of the day, I'm gonna stick with the Air Force. I don't know. Call it that I saw the Top Gun movie this year, even though I know that's Navy Air Force part. But you know what? Give me the Falcons here in 24-14.
Hey, as long as the game takes the under on time and under on points, if you bet on it, hopefully you win.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely there. So that'll be a fun one to watch. That's an 11:30 kickoff too. That's an early kick.
I mean, most of the guys in the academy, they're up at 5 a.m. for, PT anyway. So 11, or even if it's, wherever it is, that's midday for them. That's not a problem.
All right. So let's move to our second game of the week here, fresh. We got Wake Forest traveling to NC State. Wake Forest is a 4.5 point favorite. Over under for this game is set at 54 points. Both these teams are reeling right now, fresh. It's kind of weird to see this. We came into this year, both Wake Forest and NC State, we thought would have a really good shot at competing for an ACC title. Both of them are coming off of either a bad loss by Wake Forest. They got absolutely manhandled by Louisville last weekend. 8 turnovers in that game. Ugly game out of Wake Forest and Sam Hartman. And then you look at NC State. They barely hung on last weekend to beat a really bad Virginia Tech team, and it's sad for me to say that. And then they go up to Northern New York and get shellacked by Syracuse. Ever since that Devin Leary injury at the Florida State game, we kind of have seen this weird Wolfpack team here. So I know that both these teams they have a lot of questions. They have a lot of things that people are starting to doubt them quite a bit here. Are they really that good? Are they really what we thought they were going to be? Fresh, I'll turn it over to you. What do you got with Wake Forest and NC State?
I mean, first off, this game has lost a lot of luster from where we even thought during the summer. Um, and as bad as struggling as they've been playing lately, I'm even shocked that they both finished in the top 25 in the first initial poll for the college football playoff. Like, they have not, neither of those programs have shown me the past few weeks that they are elite, especially with struggling. Um, the eight turnovers last week versus Louisville for Wake Forest, and NC State barely surviving, a terrible Virginia Tech team and having to get a 1 point win at home. Um, I don't. It doesn't. They don't feel like elite or top programs right now. Maybe they just sort of have run their course. They got have maybe had a bad week or bad 2 weeks. NC State not having Leary there has definitely hurt them down the stretch. If Leary was still playing, I think that NC State team would be much more of a threat. Um, but they're both eliminated from the race with Clemson beating them both straight up, and then also struggling, and having their other issues. It just doesn't feel like what we expected this game to be. We if both these teams had taken care of business and beaten Clemson, it would have been a great shootout, there in Winston Salem this weekend, and really one of those teams could have been highly ranked going into the month of November. But right now, it's just it. Both teams are struggling for an identity. Um, both teams are really beat up, and uh, it's not what this game was supposed to be and what we kind of envisioned it to be. I think I think Wake Forest has more weapons right now. Leary being out, I think they have Hartman at quarterback, veteran quarterback there, a little more explosive consistently all year. That offense, NC State's offense, not with all the receivers and running backs they had coming back, they have not put up the points or the yards that we thought they would have, being that cohesive unit. Wake Forest has more of that, but NC State's defense, um, they've been a bend not break. And under Dave Dorn, who's a defensive coach, I kind of it started off early that game versus Texas Tech where the offense just was not flowing. They didn't really score in the red zone. Defense would give up a lot of yards, but not points. But you sort of knew there was issues there. Um, I didn't see that much out of Wake. I saw more alarming stuff out of NC State early in the year. Both those chickens have come home to roost, and I really think that Wake Forest is going to find a way to win this matchup. Being at home, they're going to find a way to squeak through. It's not going to be the glamorous two quarterbacks going after it like we thought we were going to see. But I think Wake Forest has enough left in the tank, and the 8 turnovers last week, I think, added extra motivation for them to get it right and put some points on the board to get a W.
Yeah, if NC State's going to win this game, it's going to be one on the defensive side of the football. I'm a little bit down on NC State offensively. I know that they have a fairly the running game is still okay there, but losing Leary has just absolutely been destructive towards that Wolfpack offense. You take a look at the defense side. So let's think about this: is how could NC State pull off an upset here? Because I definitely think it would be an upset if NC State wins this game. They're going to have to build on the 11 interceptions they have on the year. They're going to have to get Wake Forest to give them a short field. You look at this, and they have, if they're able to turn Sam Hartman over maybe 2, 3 times, get the ball where you only have about 40 or 45 yards to go to the end zone, I think it's going to provide NC State with a lot more opportunities and an ability to knock them off. The thing that they have to neutralize, though, is A.T. Perry. I know everything is always going to be about the quarterback. We're always going to talk about Hartman here and his ability to throw the ball. He's got, I believe, like 22 touchdowns right now. It's Perry that is really the one that I'm concerned with here. You've seen NC State lock down some really good receivers this season. You saw what they kind of did with Clemson, and Clemson's offense was sputtering throughout almost that entire game. And finally, it wasn't towards the second half where they started to kind of really get clicking on that point. So I'm expecting Perry to be the one who moves the needle in this game here, Fresh. That over under at 54 just seems like a field day for me. I'm taking the under, and I'm taking the under hard on that one because I just I could see Wake Forest putting up 40 points in this game. I don't see NC State putting up 14. If NC State does it, it's going to be a close game. I'm looking at 17-14 type of game. But even this, like Wake Forest last week, played an awful game versus Louisville, an absolutely terrible game. And they still wound up scoring 21 points in that game. I think that offense at Wake Forest is much better equipped to handle these kind of little falls here. And I think Wake Forest is going to go into NC State and win this game here. I don't know. Maybe we could see an upset here, but I really feel like this is one of those games that I feel pretty confident in.
Yeah, I think this is gonna be an easy game for Wake Forest to get right and really put up some points. And like you said, scoring 21 points and turning it over 8 times means you had 11 drives, at least. And I don't even how many times they've even punted. So that just shows you that the offense, when right, was clicking. They were putting points on the board. They just need to maintain the, be a little more careful with that football, hold on to it, make better decisions, and they'll be okay.
All right, Fresh. So let's go to our third game here. The Alabama Crimson Tide traveling to Death Valley and LSU. This used to be one of the marquee rivalry games in the SEC. And all of a sudden, with a college football ranking, all of a sudden, this magically becomes this huge matchup between the number 6 team in the country versus the number 10 team in the country. I know we'll talk a little bit about the rankings here, but I'll kind of give a little piece here. I felt like LSU was the most overrated team that jumped way too high at number 6, or I'm sorry, from number 10, from where they were in the other polls here. I'm not like blown away by their body of work. I still kind of fault them for that FSU loss in New Orleans there. Like that just it was tough for me to see this. But we take a look at Alabama. They lost that game. They went into Rocky Top. They lost to Tennessee. Tennessee is now the number 1 team in the country. You see them go against Mississippi State last week. And Alabama, prior to that game, had really kind of depended on Gibbs, the running back, and to kind of control the football game. And then all of a sudden, it went Bryce Young is back. It looks like he's fully healthy to go, throwing the ball around the field 35 times in that game for 2 touchdowns. And then they hold down Will Rogers. They absolutely kind of stifled the Mississippi State offense there that the Pirate kind of had clicking on all cylinders. I still have some questions about Alabama. I still have a few things that I think is very un-Alabama-y. I guess if that's a word I can use there. So someone will look that one up for me in the dictionary. I don't know, Fresh. Like, what are you seeing here with this matchup here? Is this going to be all Crimson Tide, or where's the Tigers got the advantage?
I think first off, LSU is getting a lot of credit for beating Ole Miss the way that they did. When it comes to the committee, must have loved that Ole Miss beatdown because they put Ole Miss at 11. So that's a huge statement, that they had there. I don't think did they really factor in how bad they got beat by Tennessee in Death Valley. But LSU, no matter what it is at this point, they're number 10 in the country. They're ranked there. Alabama's number 6. You just got to play with it, and the games are going to decide if the ranking's true or not for any of these teams right now going forward. Um, I still have questions about Dean. I still have questions about the LSU passing game. The defense has improved as the season has gone on, and they are a good football team. I don't think they're number 10 in the country, but we'll see what happens. This Saturday. Death Valley at night is always a weird place. It's a crazy environment, and it's good for at least 3 points for the Tigers. Alabama coming into town, it's going to be even more of a heightened environment because Alabama LSU is the SEC West rivalry, and there's been some classic matchups and classic battles going back and forth, and crazy things have happened over the past you know couple decades. It's going to be a festival on Saturday night. Now, looking at Alabama all season long, this has not been an Alabama football team. Um, that offensive line, which usually is Nick Saban's secret sauce, he's always had an offensive line that will open up holes that allows the running backs to run your ball down your throat, protect your quarterback, and allow the receivers to get open. Even into place to develop. That offensive line is a sieve. There's too much pressure. There's been pressure on Bryce Young all year. He's been running for his life. The running game has been, at times looks great. Gibbs hits the hole and takes off, and the other times it just gets bogged up and there's nothing there to finish out a football game or finish out a drive. It's just been all. It's not been an Alabama team. Maybe Bill O'Brien, his play calling this year has been a little off. There's been a lot of people voicing that opinion, across the country. Um, and the other things, they don't have that superstar receiver like they've had in the past. They don't have the Julio Joneses, the Ridleys, the Jerry Judys, the Jameson Williams, the Mechis, the Waddles. They don't, they don't have that guy. Jermaine Burton is not that guy. He was not the guy at Georgia. He was one of the guys. He is not the guy, and they're definitely lacking that explosive playmaker in the back end who can stretch the field and get that defense off the front seven, where then they're able to run the ball more successfully or create and work with the quarterback to get open to allow Bryce Young to manipulate and make things happen. They don't have that element right now. And you saw it versus Texas when Bryce Young had to run by himself at the end to even get close to winning that football game and set up a game-winning field goal or in a game-winning touchdown pass late in the fourth quarter, setting up those late drives and miracles. Um, he was running for his life versus Tennessee, and trying to do things there. There's been games this year where he's been a little off and a little on. How's he going to respond in Tiger Stadium without having receivers that he truly trusts? It's going to be interesting to see. Um, Will Anderson, I haven't seen the Will Anderson I saw last year. I haven't seen him take over a football game by himself. I think Alabama kind of hoped that him and Dallas Turner and battle in the secondary, and Juice McKendry, Kool Aid McKendry would lock down, and really the defense wouldn't be much of an issue. That defense has not been an Alabama defense either. There's been issues on both sides of the football. Um, it's youth, inexperience. It's maybe bad play calling, guys not buying in. Who knows? But it's not an Alabama football team we've seen the past few years. Now, one thing I'll also say is maybe recruiting is starting to catch up with Nick Saban because there was a while Saban was recruiting head and shoulders above everybody else in the country. And you see what other teams starting to get it, starting to pull players away from Alabama. They're going to Georgia, they're going to Tennessee, they're going to A&M, they're going to Miami, they're going to USC, they're going to Ohio State, they're going to Michigan. The talent pool starting to spread where instead of them having everything, you start to see other schools catch up in the recruiting race. And it's starting to pay off where that depth that you've had for years is not as strong. And you're starting to have to maybe coach these guys up a little bit more. I've seen that a lot. That's just my personal opinion. Alabama, they're starting to trend off a little bit, and the playing field is becoming even, where everyone's either rising up to them or they're sort of lowering down the field. Whichever way you want to look at it, that's up to you. Um, I think Alabama's going to be a little disrespected being number 6. I think Nick Saban's going to enjoy seeing that ranking come out, that they're not getting the respect, and somehow why is Clemson or Michigan or whoever higher than us, and what that nonsense. Um, and I think the bye week after a nice, get right game versus Mississippi State, I think they take care of business. Now, one side note: the reason why Brian Kelly wanted to come to LSU is to finally beat Alabama. He said that's the reason he said I'm leaving Notre Dame because I want to be able to compete and beat Alabama and win a national championship. This is his first taste of that rivalry. When he was at Notre Dame, Alabama and Nick Saban wiped the floor with him, and yeah, everyone saw it. It was every time the playoff or the BCS showed up. We all know there's just little footage you can pull up on YouTube wherever you want of Alabama players running right past Notre Dame players scoring touchdowns. Now you came to LSU. You should have in your mind. You should have a little more athletic players, more talent. How do you use your scheme with a quote unquote more of a talent pool, better players to perform and actually compete with Alabama? We will find out if it's scheme and you have better in your mind, you have better players to compete with them, or is Alabama just have your number and you're not good enough? This is going to be a big statement here for Brian Kelly, where this is why you came here. This is your chance. You get a chance at Nick Saban with a different squad, a different place. You're not playing this in South Bend. You're not playing this at a neutral site. You're playing at Tiger Stadium at night. Um, I don't think that's going to pay off in the end. I think Alabama finds a way to get a win. This will not be an Alabama dominant effort. Last year, LSU played when they played hard under Orgeron, Max Johnson, and those guys. They scraped it together and made it a football game for full 4 quarters. I think this game is going to be a 34-27, 34-31 Alabama win, but it's not going to pass the eye test, and people are going to have more questions about Alabama than answers. And I think actually LSU might look better in people's eyes, even for the loss.
It's weird for me here, Fresh, because everyone's talking about how this is a down year for Alabama or how Alabama is slipping a little bit. Man, there's 120 programs in the country that would sign up for an Alabama down year. Sitting there at number 6, like that's one of the funny things that I sometimes laugh with fans is how spoiled you kind of get. And then when you're at the top of the mountain, how eager people are to knock you off of the top of the mountain. Like the minute you show just that slight piece of weakness, when you don't blow out a team, you know, by 25 points. Oh, you didn't absolutely destroy them or you didn't boat race them or anything like that. Alabama's only loss this year is on the road to Tennessee in a game that could have gone either way. And they had one of the worst disciplined games of their lives there with all those penalties in that game. You take a look at that Mississippi State game as they came back from that loss, and they cleaned up a lot of the things that gave them fits during that Tennessee game. They cleaned up the penalties there. I'm with you here, Fresh. I'm waiting for that. Gibbs looks like a great running back for Alabama. I really like him. He runs hard, he runs fast, and he runs strong. I'm still waiting for that Alabama receiver to jump out the page this year. We haven't had one. And that's so weird to me because we're so used to Alabama having these marquee wide receivers. Same thing with LSU though. LSU now, as much as I think that they're overrated at 10, and I really do think that that's a stretch because their 2 losses are are bad, but I'll give you the Mississippi State or the Ole Miss win is a good win for them. Kayshon Boutte, where's he at? Like we haven't seen him have. He's supposed to be one of the best, if not the best, NFL prospect as a wide receiver this year. Hasn't really connected with Daniels at all in that game. The offense for LSU is still very, very reliant on Daniels, and this is where I think that it's going to wind up getting to them. Nick Saban was the defensive coordinator for Bill Belichick in the 1994-95 under the Cleveland Browns. Nick Saban is one of the best defensive minds in all of football. And I really believe that he just has this, he's like Belichick to me. He has this great ability to scheme, take away what you do very, very well and make you beat them by your weakness. Jaden Daniels, he comes over from Arizona State. Why did he leave Arizona State? Okay, well, I want to be able to play at LSU. Great. All well and good. He's been really good for LSU. He's only got 12 touchdowns on the season. He's got some rushing touchdowns as well, but I'm still waiting to see that it factor coming out of him because he doesn't have that. He doesn't have that jump off the page. I was trying to, and what I did with Jaden Daniels fresh, and you kind of understand why I did this. I went back to last year and looked at Hendon Hooker because Hendon Hooker is a really, I felt was a good comparison. He transferred away from a pretty decent program, transferred from Virginia Tech. He wasn't immediately the starter wherever he transferred to. Jaden Daniels battled it out during training camp and was named the starter early on this year. And then you started to see like, oh, there's talent here. He was just underutilized at the other program. And I'm seeing that a little bit in Daniels, but he's not jumping off the page as well for me. I really have some questions about this Tigers team. I think that I think it might be close in the first half. I think the home field advantage is going to be the best equalization factor here in this game. But Alabama's still a 13.5 point favorite. Over under is 58 points. I think Nick Saban's using that sixth ranking as motivation and some fuel for them to really show up and play. Man, give me the Tide in this one, and I'm gonna say that they're not gonna cover. I'm gonna go though Alabama with a 10-point win.
Well, the crazy thing is that LSU could end the Alabama run through the college football playoff and get them knocked out this Saturday by giving them a second loss. That second loss, the odds of them making the SC championship game and then winning that game again, the playoff it's very, very, very small. LSU could put the end on. Will that pressure of being contention for an SEC West title, already having a tiebreaker over Ole Miss and beating out, like, will that pressure take the team, maybe get them a little too antsy and not play disciplined football? How will Brian Kelly manage that? Because they're going to hear a chatter of, if you guys win, you have a good chance of going to Atlanta. Um, it The discipline factor has to come in and be a focus for LSU if they want to have any kind of chance. Because the penalties, like you saw, when Alabama, they have what 13, 15 penalties at versus Tennessee, and they
Mhm.
still only lost by 3 points, and they look sloppy at times. If you start giving away yards and giving away possessions or allowing possessions to be extended, that's how you lose football games. You can't beat yourself. You've got to make the opponent try to beat.
All right, Fresh. Let's go to our next game here. This one, I really thought that the College Football Playoff Committee would put Notre Dame in the top 25 to make this a ranked matchup. I was shocked that they didn't like sneak Notre Dame in there at 25 to give them 4 versus 25 as well. But the Clemson Tigers are traveling up north to South Bend, Indiana, face the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Clemson's a 3.5 point favorite in this game. Over under is set at 44.5. I'm looking at this, man. Notre Dame's had two big wins. Two, they beat UNLV 44-21. They beat a ranked Syracuse and a good Syracuse defense. They put up 41 points on Syracuse. And then you take a look at Clemson. They've had a week off, but, going back, they struggled against Wake Forest. They struggled to put NC State away. They completely boat raced Boston College, but then they struggle with Florida State. They struggle with Syracuse in a game that, again, we go back to that. A lot of people think that game, there's some things in there that maybe should have gone Syracuse's way and didn't. I don't know here, Fresh. This is interesting here because I really want to jump on the Notre Dame bandwagon, but I feel like this is the game that Notre Dame lets you down in. Like everything, you have all this positive momentum building up with the Irish, and then they just pull the football out from under you. I feel like Charlie Brown walking up to kick the football, and she pulls it out from under me. And I fall on my back here, and I just feel bad about it. So, Fresh, give me some hope. Anything with Notre Dame? What are you
I mean,
liking?
I think you kind of hit it right off the bat. They were competitive versus Ohio State, and they might have showed other teams how to play defense against Ohio State and forced them to run the football. Like they had a great showing that week one, and people were like, "Man, maybe this team isn't bad except they can't score any points." Then you lose to Marshall, and everyone's like, "What? That at home you lose to Marshall?" Um, and then they struggle versus Cal, and then you go to a couple weeks later you go out to Vegas and you put on a show. They were dominating BYU, and they gave up some garbage points later, make it close. But they come out there and they dominate BYU, and then they dominate North Carolina, put up 45, give up 24 to that North Carolina offense in Chapel Hill. They lose to Stanford. And then, they go up to Syracuse, and a team that we thought might have shown up and try to like, hey, you know what? We've got to prove that that loss was, a fluke. And they absolutely dominate Syracuse. Um, it it might be one of the craziest starts to a Notre Dame coach in in their first 8 games, because that you look back even to the Oklahoma State game in the Fiesta Bowl, they built a huge lead. I think they were up like 25, 28, maybe even 30 points, and then Oklahoma State stormers back in the second half. I don't know what to make of this Notre Dame football team. Um, it's a chance where Marcus Freeman still is also waiting for that big win that he's coached in big games and lost. Well, where's that signature win for Marcus Freeman? Is Syracuse your signature win? Is North Carolina? Because they have a chance. Still got got this game. You got USC, who was the ninth team in the country after the first poll. You could potentially get 4 ranked wins if you won out the rest of your schedule, and still have a loss to Stanford and Marshall on your record. Um, this, in my opinion, recruiting wise, coaches will point to this football game and point to this stretch of, do you want to go to Notre Dame because this team can't beat anybody, or this is why you should come to Notre Dame because we are going to be good enough to beat these teams. Um, I've seen, Notre Dame's played Georgia in the regular season. They've had battles with Clemson before, especially down there. I met one of them at a Hurricane a couple of years ago. They've had matches with Florida State, Miami. They play big games. You want to be the big spectacle, but the one thing that Notre Dame hasn't done a lot lately is actually win those big games. This is a chance for Marcus Freeman and that program to take care of business. The offensive line needs to show up. Running backs need to show up. Michael Mayer needs to be a focus point of that offense. They need to be physical with Clemson. Clemson's offense is nothing to write home about. Notre Dame's defense and Marcus Freeman should have a scheme together to take that out. DJU was benched last week. Benched. A team that's in the top 4 and you bench your quarterback, not because of injury concerns, not because of any of that, but because of play, is a huge alarm that's going off. You have a chance to play on that, because if he has struggles, if he's even starting on Saturday night and he struggles, things will start flying through his mind. The team's going to start doubting themselves. Is this our guy? And you might see them break. So you have to be able to get after them early, put the pressure on them, and make them doubt themselves and make Clemson falter on the road. You cannot give them any hope. You cannot give DJU any hope on the road. If you do, that's when things start to steamroll. Use the crowd, use the night environment there in South Bend. Find a way to pull off an upset. You got nothing to lose. Nobody gives you a chance. They've seen you lose to 2 of the worst teams in the country. You have nothing to lose, but you do have some talent there. It's Notre Dame. Can you rally the troops? Can you get the team to play as one and find a way to pull off one of the biggest upsets? If you do, you'll do the entire nation a service, because it'll put Clemson out of the playoff. Because I honestly think if Clemson, I don't care who the quarterback is, if they play any of the top 10 teams right now in the current poll as it came out, this evening, they will lose. That team is just, the defense isn't what we thought it was coming into the season. There's a lot of players there. It might get drafted in the first round. They aren't playing at an elite standard. Will Shipley's a good running back, but he's not a Christian McCaffrey type dominant running back. The receivers aren't getting separation. They aren't playing like Clemson receivers have in the past. The offensive line has been a little leaky. It's not the same Clemson team. They're living more on their name than they are on their play on the field. And you talk of margin of victory and game control and all that fun stuff, the offensive defensive categories. They're not ranking and dominating those like they have in the past. This is not a Trevor Lawrence or Deshaun Watson Clemson football team. This is a beatable team, and Notre Dame, you have a chance to really take the life out, because after this game, all they really have is South Carolina, and maybe North Carolina gets them in the ACC title game, but you have a chance of ending it and really giving your program a huge win at the same time.
Yeah, if I'm Notre Dame, because Notre Dame has a solid defense. I mean, probably above average defense, we call it. I don't know if there's too many times where I've seen them have letdowns there. But again, you go back to, they schemed against Ohio State, and they did a great job against Ohio State that first weekend of the year. You look and see what they did against Syracuse and really shut down a high-powered Syracuse attack. If I'm Notre Dame, I'm watching the NC State game against Clemson. one of the things that NC State did that made Clemson's life so difficult is they shut down Will Shipley in that game. I would do the same thing. I would force, while DJU is getting better, he's making better reads, he's passing the ball better this year, he is escaping the pocket a little bit better here. I'm forcing him to beat me. I know Will Shipley can beat me. I know if I let Will Shipley get going on the ground, it could be a long day in South Bend, Indiana. But if I shut him down and I force DJU's made mistakes. DJU's also shown that he can beat you. And at that point, you go, do you trust your secondary? Or do you tip your cap and say, okay, you beat me, great. Good job for you. You're just the better guy this week. The one matchup, Fresh, that I'm really interested in, and I know Notre Dame's going to run the ball a lot too. I'm really curious about this one, though. Michael Mayer, we both think that he's top 2, 3 tight end in the nation, maybe the best tight end in the nation. There's a really good argument to be made right there at that top tight end position. There's some amazing tight ends this year. I want to see him matched up against Jeremiah Trotter Jr. and Trenton Simpson. I think that matchup, if Mayer can win that matchup on offense, and Notre Dame's not going to pass the ball a bunch, but they'll throw it a little bit there to keep the Clemson defense kind of on their heels. If Mayer can win those matchups against the linebackers, and Clemson has pretty decent linebackers, if he can win that matchup, watch out. I think things could start getting rolling. I think the positive vibe there. I think the Irish fans, you're going to be singing, you're going to be praising all sorts of rootiness over there. You're going to really be going for things. Touchdown Jesus is going to be lit on Saturday night there in South Bend. You got to make sure the crowd stays in this. Don't let Clemson take you out of the game. You got to be amped. You got to be ready to go. Go do Holy Communion Saturday at Mass, whatever it's going to take, man. You're right. You can knock out Clemson out of the playoffs. Fresh, I'm going to call it right now. I'll go Notre Dame pulls this off, even though I feel like I'm putting myself out there to be let down. Come on, Notre Dame. Do not let me down here. I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to say Notre Dame wins by a touchdown in this game. I'm thinking 6-7 points.
I'm taking the Irish 23-20.
Wow. Nice. All right, Fresh. Let's go to our game of the week. Huge matchup. This to me now is a rivalry game. I know that the Georgia-Tennessee rivalry was a rivalry, but this is a rivalry game. This is a rivalry game that everyone, that even if you're not a Georgia-Tennessee fan, you turn on the TV for this game here. It's a 3:30 kickoff on CBS there. This is the rivalry game that this gets into. This is starting to get into the Alabama, Auburn area, Ohio State, Michigan, Army, Navy, Vermilion, Firelands. I don't know who Vero Beach's rival was, but this is turning into just such a clash of the titans here that I'm talking as a person who isn't a true blue fan out of both of these teams. I think that this is one of those, when it gets to a rivalry piece, where the common person who's just a college football fan is tuning into this game, even if their team is playing at 3:30.
How is it a rivalry on those levels? Georgia's won 10 of the past 12. They've won 10 more than Volunteers in the series. It's just because they're ranked number 1, number 2 in the AP poll, and 1 and 3 in the college football playoff.
I think it's because
that's not they're conference rivals, but they are not.
I don't think
it's not a rivalry of Auburn, Alabama, or Michigan, Ohio State.
Well, I mean, look at the records of Ohio State and Michigan over the last 20 years. I mean, the reason why I'm saying that, though, Fresh, I think it's because of what we've seen Tennessee do so far. I think the biggest thing about it is that when they beat Alabama, and that's when you become a threat, because Tennessee knocked off Alabama. That's one giant in the SEC. And we talked about this a month ago. we said this stretch run for Tennessee is going to end in Athens. It ends in Athens. And are they able to roll through this stretch? Said we were going to learn a lot about the Volunteers in this stretch. They've done everything, and they've done it in amazing fashion. Georgia, ever since that Missouri game, has turned onto another gear. They go into the cocktail party, completely dominate the Gators. They're rolling at this thing. This is why, like, it becomes a rivalry to that proportion. It's not for the history of it, but because of the two teams
It's
where they're
just a
at.
big game. It's not a rival. They're rivals, but it's not a rivalry just because they're there. They were unranked last year. They've been unranked for a long time. So they're. I wouldn't say it's a rivalry just because they're ranked. Like last year, nobody called it a rivalry. They were just their conference rivals, but they aren't. It wasn't a rivalry. It's not the top three teams that Georgia considers rival anyway. But whatever. We digress. Um, Georgia has no chance. I mean, come on. Why are we even playing this football game? Tennessee's offense is absolutely amazing. Their defense has improved. They're number one in the country. Everybody loves them. Even if it doesn't matter, like this game doesn't even. Why are we even playing this game, Steph? It doesn't even matter. Like this game has no point of even being played. Everybody loves Tennessee. They're fantastic. They had the Heisman front runner. They had the cool new coach. It's this is just the game on Saturday. Why even it shouldn't even be played. Just move on. Put Tennessee in the playoff and
uh,
just forget all
uh,
about old little Georgia. It doesn't really matter.
Why are we doing a podcast then?
I'm just saying, like
Okay.
that's what this whole everyone in the entire country is like, oh, Tennessee's the greatest thing in the
So
world.
you're slow
We all
playing
should
this
just
one
stop
here.
and bow down.
You're slow playing this one.
Stop and bow
Okay.
down.
All right, here. Go ahead.
It look, Tennessee is a great football team. Their offense is very good. They've been putting up points. Yes, they are on parallel to be just like LSU's 2019 team, and that team did go undefeated. I'll start off giving just sort of looking at that the Tennessee football team as it is right now. The LSU team, Burrow threw 60 touchdowns and 5,600 yards. They had receivers who had multiple guys had over 1,500 yards, and one with 20 touchdowns, one with 18, and the third receiver had 13 touchdowns, and their running back ran for 1,400 yards. So they had a lot of stars, individual players on that offense that really lit it up. And I think that's caught more people's eye than this Tennessee team. Tennessee is a unit. It's not as many individual players. Yes, Tillman, yes, Hyatt are great, but they do not have the multiple guys with 10 plus touchdowns. They don't have Hooker on pace for 60 touchdowns at this point. But the offense as a whole is still scoring on the same exact pace and maybe even trying to surpass that in yards as well. So it's a different kind of offense that we saw the superstars of all the three receivers, the running back, Thaddeus Moss, the tight end, and Burrow just chuck it. You knew the names; they all had substantial stats. Here, if you look at the stat sheet for Tennessee's offense, total team yards, they're on pace, and they're actually going to probably surpass it if they played all 15 games. Points wise, yard wise, everything. That's how on pace this offense is. They are lethal. But stat wise, individually, the players that have caught touchdowns and caught passes and been involved is extremely significant, almost doubles what LSU had. And that shows that guys are in rotation and they're developing players. They don't need 4 or 5 targets. They have an entire team. So if some guy was injured, like Tillman was this year, other guys stepped up and made plays. And that's why you can't focus on one single player in this hyper offense. He puts 4 and 5 receivers on the field, and everybody is a viable option, whether it's left, right, north, and south. And that's what makes his offense so creative and so explosive that it's fast paced and anybody is able to and lethal enough to get the football and score at any point. There is speed at all positions. They don't have to be 5-star receivers and 4-star receivers. They've developed 3-star players who've been there from the Pruitt regime and got them into positions where they can dominate. They are the number one offense in total yards per game in the country, but they're 121st in time possession. That no knack on that. That just shows they score quickly and they're not waiting around for you. They're going, and they're putting points on the board. People would give them trouble if they weren't scoring touchdowns at a crazy pace. They're scoring almost 50 points a game, but when your time possession is an average of probably 2 minutes a drive, a minute and a half, it doesn't matter. If you weren't scoring, that's where people start saying, well, your offense is ridiculous. You're not putting points. That's how lethal this team is. That you think that you scored, you slowed the pace down, or you even up, and boom, before you know it, they've taken the lead again and they put points on the board, and your defense gets exhausted and they wear you down because your secondary and your linebackers are running all day long. And that's also where the time possession is so quick, the points pile up. Early on, it might not be as explosive. Your points are take some time to get there. But come the third and fourth quarter, that defensive backfield and that linebacking core is exhausted from being on the field. And that's where the separation of the receivers becomes larger, easier to catch the passes, and that's where they kill you in the second half, is they wear you down. It's the exact opposite of a team that runs the football down your throat, and eventually your defense just can't handle it anymore, and you've been on the field. This is they do it the back end, and they wear down your secondary, and eventually those receivers get more open and more open and more open, and the passes become much more easier for Hooker to make. Um, Looking at Georgia on the other side, they're the number 2 team in total yards per game in the country, and they are fourth in time possession. They do it exactly the opposite. They are going to run the football, and they're going to throw the football in mediocre passes here and there. Eventually, hit maybe a big play once in a while, but they're going to manage the down distance, manage the clock, keep the control, and eventually score points. Both these teams are scoring well over 40 points a game. Georgia's one of 2 teams in the country that averages over 300 yards passing and over 200 yards rushing. And for giggles, I'm just going to go ahead and round up because Tennessee averages 199.6 yards rushing. So we might as well bump them up 200. They're also the third team. So both these teams' offenses are going to be destructive. Points will be scored in this football game. Defensively, Tennessee has improved. Their secondary knows they don't have to be perfect, and that helps the defense. They don't if they give up 30 points or 28 points, they're going to be okay. Their pass rush has definitely improved, and the defensive backs have been taking much more risks all season long. We've seen it. We saw it from the very opening game versus Ball State. The first pass, the receiver jumped the route for a pick. They know they can take chances because they have an offense that helps them, and that's what makes them volatile. All right, the Alabama game, that Tennessee team took advantage of a lot of penalties, a lot of undiscipline, but they still were able to go beat for beat, and they were not scared of Alabama. They took Will Anderson. He had a couple big plays to force him one of the, maybe get a couple sacks here and there, but they never let him completely take that Tennessee offense out of the game, and they were able to do whatever they wanted when they had to. That shows the team's mental state of they don't care where they go, whether it's playing at Neyland versus Alabama, going to Death Valley at noon and taking on LSU. They don't care where they're going to go. This offense and this defense both travel, and Josh Heupel's done a heck of a job getting the team focused week in and week out. Now, this will be the biggest challenge because they're number 1 in the country in the college football playoff. The pressure is actually now on them. They are now being the hunted team because everyone's like, oh, you're number 1 now. You're not number 2, not number 3. You're number 1. Everything's on your shoulders. You are now at the target on your back. So it's going to be interesting to see how Heupel keeps that train, not just for this week, but going forward. Because even if they lose to Georgia, there's a very good chance that they do make the playoff just because their resume is so strong. Now, if they get blown out by Georgia, people might start scratching their heads. But I feel either way, they're making the playoff. So this is going to be interesting to see how if they blow out Georgia, if they blow Georgia out, that might put Georgia in. They're not making the playoff and they're done because that's an eye test sort of thing as well. If it's a close game, very similar to Alabama, where it comes to a single possession, people start asking questions, and both teams might be in the mix. So this is a very big game. I kind of said it during our recap. It's kind of a quarterfinal where if you keep the 4 teams in the playoff, this game means more now. If you go to a 12-team playoff, both these teams are in the playoff, and it's more of like, do I want to host the game or do I want to be on the road? And that's kind of what you come down to. So the value of this game is tremendous. Looking at the AP poll side, this is the very first time number 1 versus number 2 in the AP poll have ever met in Sanford Stadium. So this is an unprecedented territory in that setting. I expect the hedges to be rocking and a lot of red and black everywhere. And if you're a dog fan listening, you better not have sold tickets to volunteer fans. We don't want them orange in that stadium. But I think Stetson Bennett does get the raw deal because he's led an offense that has put up the exact same, yards per game basically, and almost the exact same points per game as Tennessee. But he doesn't get credit because, he doesn't look as flashy or they don't score as quick. But both these offenses have firepower. Now, before I wrap up, Nolan Smith not playing and being out with a pectoral injury is a huge blow to Georgia. But last week, the Dogs had 34 quarterback pressures. He was only responsible for 1 of them. There's a lot of young pups, whether it's Robert Beal, Michael Williams, Jamon Dumas, Johnson, Mal Munden, Jalen Carter, the rest of the crew. They will find creative ways to get pressure on the quarterback, but it does have a huge blow not having Nolan out there. He'll be on the sideline coaching the guys up, but definitely a big loss. But you know what? Like Alabama fans last year complained about receivers not playing. You can't complain about, a player not being on the field. Injuries happen. You have to get the guys out there. You recruited 5 stars and 4 stars. They should be able to show up. and it's their time to shine and get on the field and make a play. Now, as great as Georgia's defense has been the past few years and really been going strong, this year they have some leaks. Now, maybe it's a lot of youth on the team, but bear with me here as I go through this. The top five games for missed tackles in Kirby Smart's reign at Georgia, two of them have happened this year. Now, the first one was the 2017 national championship game versus Alabama. They missed 17 tackles and they lost that game in overtime. The second was the same year, 2017, at Auburn in late November, and they got thumped and they missed 17 tackles. The third most was the loss versus Texas in the Sugar Bowl when they missed 16 tackles. But then they come to this year, the win versus Florida this past Saturday, the Dogs missed 16 tackles. That game could have been much worse. They had 3 turnovers and they missed 16 tackles. They could have destroyed them, but they did not play up that very well. They played underrated. They played mentally weak at times, and that's a kind of a glaring case. And then the fifth most missed tackles was versus Missouri. They missed 15. So 2 of the 5 all time happening this season. Muschamp, Schulman, and Kirby need to coach up that defense, and those guys got to play a little tougher on Saturday because they cannot let Volunteers running rampant in the secondary and making plays and taking 5 yards into 15. Missed tackles become touchdowns, and that's a problem. In the end, though, it's in Sanford. Georgia's offense is being overlooked. Georgia's being overlooked. They were put number 3. That's right there. That's perfect, fuel. Georgia wins 41-37 and brings the Volunteers back down to earth.
All right. Well, I wonder who you're a fan of there, Fresh. That's a lot there on that piece. Fresh, let me give you this here for you. I went through and granted, Tennessee, yes, they're the darlings of college football right now. There's no way around it. And that's what you're going to be if you're a team like this. Just like last year, Georgia was the darlings of college football last year because Georgia was on track to win a national title. This game is going to be a true measuring point for both of these programs here. And it was a conversation that I was having the other day on this is the level of Georgia's staying power at the elite level of college football. I think that Georgia is here to stay. I think that you're in what I always refer to as big boy football, and you're at that level of you're the top of the top. And everyone's going to expect you week in, week out to be perfect. And that's really, really difficult to do. Not many programs can pull it off. And the only program that I really think that's able to pull that off year in, year out is Alabama. And even Alabama has blips in the radar where they're not perfect. If I'm Georgia, here's the game plan for this game. The first 2 drives, whatever. I am bringing in 2 tight end set. I'm bringing in Bowers and I'm bringing in Washington. I'm splitting them out into the slot, and I'm forcing the Tennessee linebackers to cover them. I don't care if you run slants down the field. I don't care if you run out routes to those guys down the field. I am forcing Tennessee to match up against those 2 tight ends because I think both of those 2 tight ends present Georgia with the biggest advantage that they have over Tennessee. I know Georgia's a running team. I get that. The reason why I'm doing that though is very early on, I want to prevent Georgia from seeing 8, 9-man fronts in the box. I know that they're tough. I know that line's tough. I know it's physical. I know they're able to open up holes. But I'm going to try to make life easier on myself regardless, one way or another. I think to do that, I'm going to use those tight ends. For this, listen, Tennessee and Hendon Hooker, he's just been on a rocket trajectory to this point. And this is where the old Ric Flair quote comes in. To be the man, you got to beat the man. The championship for the East runs through Athens. If Tennessee wants to go to the playoffs, and even if Tennessee loses this game, I'm not guaranteeing them into the playoff. I'm really not. Because my thing is this. If you didn't beat the best team in the SEC, and their home stadium, you're not ready yet. We've talked all this year about Tennessee being ready to take that jump. They've looked great. They've looked phenomenal. I can use a bunch more words to describe how amazing they are. You've already done it for me, although yours was a little more facetious than what I'm doing here. But I'm saying that for Tennessee to really get to that point where we really need to kind of put them up on that level of a pedestal, they have to beat Georgia. They have to. If they don't, it's an empty gesture. Yeah, you can really, because if Georgia wins this game, Georgia's pretty much a lock for Atlanta. Like there is a way that Georgia doesn't go to Atlanta. It's slim to none, favoring none. I got a better chance of moving back to Northern Ohio and working at Romps than I do sitting here and saying like, okay, Georgia can lose this football game and not make it to Atlanta. It just doesn't. It's not going to happen there. So that's why I don't feel like this game guarantees Tennessee a spot in the playoffs. Hooker's phenomenal. If I'm Tennessee, I'm doing everything that I'm gonna do. I'm gonna see if I can hit Hyatt. I'm gonna see if I can if Tillman needs to be worked back in a little bit. And I think, although the Hooker to Hyatt connection is one thing in Las Vegas, it's another thing when it's played in the SEC there. So I'm telling you, Fresh, I think this game is going to be entertaining as hell. I think it's going to be wildly close. I don't think this is a blowout win for either team. I I'm worried about the Nolan Smith injury. That's huge. Like you can say all you want about everything else, and I hate this adage. I hate the adage "next man up." I hate that coach speech because it disrespects the player that just went down. I know oh, I got to get the backup behind me, and the backup is not Nolan Smith. Like Nolan Smith is a top 25 NFL prospect. I don't know who's going to back him up. You'd know better than I would who's going to replace him there. You'd top 25 NFL prospects don't grow on trees, man. Like I don't care. That's a big loss. Um in the end, I'm going to go a coin flip of this game. It's so hard for me to pick this game because I'm looking at and there's a lot of reasons to really like Georgia. There's a lot of reasons to really like Tennessee in this game. I'm having a hard time picking this one. I really am. I think that point spread's way too much. I think where they're having that one. I know that number's come down to 8.5. I still think that 8.5 number's way too high. So I'll say Georgia wins outright. Tennessee covers.
I mean, I think coming down to it, though, this is a referendum on Kirby Smart and the Bulldogs because you brought up a great point there about how the staying power of Alabama, where Nick Saban and Alabama have been doing it for a long, long time. And we've seen LSU had their, they've gone up and they've gone down. And they were going away. They're making their way back up. We've seen Auburn. They go up for a win national championship and then they bottomed out. And now Brian Harsin gets fired and it's a whole thing there. It's the staying power of being the elite. Ohio State, been there for a long time. Michigan's starting to make their way back into the conversation, but they were in a low spot. But it's that staying power. And that's the real key for Kirby. And this is the biggest game for him is to all your recruits, to all your players, to even to the national media, was it a 1 year hit and they're back down to being above average or a solid team, but not an elite team, or are they be able to defend their title in essence and keep moving forward? That's what you really look at.
I'll say this,
And so that
Fresh.
it'll
Are you Alabama or are you LSU? Are you Alabama or LSU? Because that's who you're talking about. Alabama
mhm.
is in their year after year. LSU wins national titles. That doesn't take away anything from that. They're a top 10 program in the country, but they don't compete for a national title every single year.
You're right. Before we wrap, because we've been talking about it,
Okay.
blind resumes, we talk about it. Quarterback play for elite teams is very important.
Okay.
So I sort of did some digging, and I did this before the college football playoff poll came out today. So I don't have Jaden Daniels included in this because I did not think LSU would be number 10 in the country. But I took C.J. Stroud, Bo Nix, Hendon Hooker, Bryce Young, Bennett, DTR. I thought UCLA would have been 10. DJU, Max Duggan, Caleb Williams, and the Michigan quarterbacks because McNamara and McCarthy, they've been in and out. And I looked at their last 8 times they played an AP top 25 team. Michigan, the 2 quarterbacks on the roster have only played 5. Caleb Williams only played 4. So I used whatever I had from those margins. Everybody else was their last 8 starts going from last week back. A couple of those had to go back to 2019 to even get 8 in there, but this is how he came out. I'm going to round some stats. I want you to tell me which that quarterback is. I'm only going to use like an average per game, not going to give you the full on stats, but just try to guess who these quarterbacks are.
Okay, so these are top
So
10 quarterbacks?
8, there's top 10 quarterbacks.
Okay.
So I have an average of 30 completions a game on 40 attempts versus AP top 25 teams. I average about 390 yards passing in these games for AP top 25 teams. And I throw 3.25 touchdowns and 0.25 interceptions in those games versus the ranked teams over that span. Who am I?
Bryce Young.
No. That's C.J. Stroud.
Okay. Heisman.
Who has 6 wins in those 8 games.
Heisman winner from last year, Heisman runner-up.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Here's another one. In games versus AP top 25 teams,
okay,
I average 19.6 completions on 31 attempts. I throw for 245 yards, barely 1 touchdown, 1.2 to be exact, and I throw 1.4 interceptions in those games.
DJU.
Close, but no. That is the collective Michigan quarterbacks of McNamara and McCarthy in the past year and a half. Struggling in big games. Now, DJU, just because we're on that subject, his average completion is 17 for 28, which is 58%, for 205 yards, 1.67 touchdowns, and 1 pick a game. That quarterback, you expect him to win a national championship. I won't go into the rest due to time, but there were some interesting numbers there on completion percentage, yards, interceptions. Very eye-popping in some numbers, but definitely Bryce Young and Hendon Hooker are almost the exact same guy.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then if Bryce Young and Hendon Hooker are the same, it's also put Stroud in there as well. Because Stroud and Bryce Young were pretty close.
And Stroud's higher than all of them in every single category.
Yeah. So, all right, Fresh, real quick before we get going, we got 2 really, really big matchups in Division 3. I didn't want to miss these here. There's some big ones here. So let me pull them up here real quick. I got the first one, 6-2, the Baldwin Wallace Yellow Jackets. My wife's alma mater and my good friend Ryan Agnew. If he probably isn't listening to this, but both of their alma mater and my dad's alma mater for his graduate program versus the Heidelberg Student Princes, my dad's undergraduate. Both of them are 6-2 on the year. Baldwin Wallace is 6-1 in the conference. Heidelberg is 5-2 in the conference. Who do you got for Heidelberg and Baldwin Wallace?
Well, in this exquisite matchup,
I know who you picked last year,
Dave.
I know who you picked last year.
I'm gonna go with Baldwin Wallace. I'm gonna take them in this football game.
Hey, so you picked Baldwin Wallace last year. I remember you picking them last year when I asked you about this game. And I'm going to ask you this. What do you know what coach played at Baldwin Wallace and his dad was his head coach at BW?
Is this coach in college football or the NFL or
He was in college football. He's no longer in college football. You know this coach as well.
Give me Lou Holtz as my guess.
Lou Holtz, it's not a bad guess because they eventually will probably look pretty similar to it. It's Jim Tressel. Jim Tressel was the quarterback of Baldwin Wallace, and his dad was the head coach there, and they have a street called Tressel Street.
Hey, The old vest.
All right. This is another big matchup here. The Mount Union Purple Raiders are at home. They're 8-0, 7-0 in conference. They're facing John Carroll, the Blue Streaks, which is named after an old roller coaster at Cedar Point. If you've never been to Cedar Point, highly recommend it. Both of these teams are just lighting people up. Is this game, I won't make you pick a winner because I know you're going to pick Mount Union because obviously we pretty much pick Mount Union almost every single time. Although I will be interested if Mount Union plays, what was it, Wisconsin Whitewater? I'll be interested to see
Whitewater.
I'll be interested to see who you pick for that matchup. But I know we normally pick Mount Union. Let me ask you this. Is this game, because both of these teams are lighting people up, they're winning big on both sides. Is this game closer than 2 scores?
No, I'm going to say Mount Union by 17.
All right. Mount Union by 17. Love it. That's going to be, I wish that I could kind of watch that game because that game it looks like it's going to be pretty entertaining to watch. And the quarterback for Mount Union is from Plant, Florida. So he's interesting, guys. All right, Fresh. Well, we got a great weekend for college football coming up here. Interesting start to November. We're going to know a lot. It's going to make for a highly entertaining wrap-up show next week. I'll be interested to see. And looks like we're going to have another interview coming up here very, very soon. So keep an eye out for that. We'll probably be announcing that next week as well. But you've been listening to another episode of the Irrational Confidence Podcast. We're part of Spinnable Sports, so make sure you're going to spinnablesports.com. Yep, that is spinnablesports.com. A lot of cool stuff over there. We did a blind resume test for the college football playoff. Also, special thanks to our producer, Drew. Without him, none of this is possible, so we want to give a special shout out to him. Make sure you like, subscribe wherever you get your podcast from, whether that's Apple, Spotify, Good Pods, Anything Pods, Amazon Pods, Google Pods. You know I don't know them all. So like, subscribe, leave us that 5-star review because you guys know, Fresh and I, we're those 5-star prospects. If you're watching this on the YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the Spinnable Sports channel. Hit that notification bell. Get notified every single time that we drop another episode for you guys. Enjoying this, follow us on Twitter. We love interacting with you guys. We put out weekly polls. And that's it. That's the spiel every single week. Hope you guys are enjoying it. Heck, it's one heck of a weekend. Let's get rolling. And it's only Tuesday.
It's a brown water weekend for me, Paps. It's a brown water weekend for me.
Yeah.
Bye, y'all.